Hi everyone, it's Maria from Jardin Le Papier, here to do a flip through of From Gabrielle's Desk. This is technically a custom order, and but she gave me free reign to do a couple of options, so this is the first option. This one is a giant book. It's really meant to represent Gabrielle's desk really as the designer as she becomes Chanel. So this one is, let's see, almost 10 inches wide with a new spine, which I did extend, by almost 13 inches tall. And the spine is actually about 2.5 inches. I'm not lifting it right now just because of my probably closer to 3 inches when all said and done. I'm going to attempt to lift it. Actually, I'll describe the cover first. The cover is meant to be a mood board. I did a mood board for Heather's journal once on the inside, but I like this concept on the outside. It has 4 pieces of fabric, actually 5, starting from her linen and her jersey knit, her jersey cotton in the beginning of her career, moving into the tweeds and cottons towards the latter part of her career, into the tweed suits. On the cover is an antique piece of French lace. It did come from Catherine at French Beaded. It is backed onto French ribbon and secured using safety pins. And I did hand stitch it so that it doesn't really go anywhere unless the person wants to actually maybe try to repair it if you're a seamstress or if you work on costumes. The ribbon is long enough so that you can actually wrap it to the cover, because if this is going to be a coffee table book, you want to secure the cover as people open it. Whoops, as I start to lose things. And you can actually wrap the ribbon around tightly so that when you open the cover, it doesn't go anywhere. So because it is a mood board, I've left some room beneath the fabric so that you can pin things like this antique measuring tape that I actually got from the Netherlands. I'll be sure to list all my sellers in the description in case I forget. And then any other pieces that you might want to pin to the cover. I did leave a couple gaps so that you could actually go in and pin some things down. So let me remove this just so that it's not flying around. So these pieces I'll actually put in a little ephemera box. This ephemera box, before we get started, actually also comes from France. Catherine at French Beaded. It's supposed to represent Etienne Balsan, Gabrielle's first lover. She lived on his estate and he rode horses, and his family actually was a textile giant in France. But in here, you'll find pieces from her childhood and any other pieces you want to use for your mood board or the fashions that I've used inside. Hopefully that's focusing. But you'll actually get an antique rosary, bracelet, pieces of Chanel ephemera, some thread, some other type of jewelry. Sorry, my camera is a little awkward because this book is so big, so I'm trying not to move too much. Other side, playing pieces. Of course, all these items are French and very unique to this journal, so I probably won't get to find them again. This is actually an antique label from a perfume. It was actually quite expensive. I'm a little shocked by that. But also some photos. This represents Gabrielle when she was working as a seamstress or before her first store opened. That's her as a little girl. I like to use this picture of a little girl. And then some friends from her orphanage in Aubazine. It's very faded, almost ghost-like. But these are real photos from Catherine. A medallion of a lady and a child. On the back is a man. I like to think of this one actually as Boy Capel, the love of her life. Hopefully that's focusing. Please focus. Are you focusing? I don't know. Let's see. I'll take pictures of more of this ephemera. Basically, it's all authentic, just like what I pretty much put in all my journals. So that'll come in this box here, and I'll just put this down. This is actually going to be removed. You'll find the fabric's pretty plain on the inside or on the cover, but you can still, again, secure your antique lace or beaded trim. This is supposed to come from, probably from a cabaret dress during the probably Victorian era, early 1900s, maybe leading up to the Edwardian era. It's the most beautiful thing. The journal itself doesn't have too much sticking out. Anything that is sticking out can be folded or cut. I do have one bookmark with a giant metal number here so you can find your spot. I was going to do them for each outfit, but it was just too heavy. The side, the original book cover spine, the thickest chipboard I've ever worked with, extended it with a wool boucle and these antique French and Czechoslovakian buttons right here. And then a little bit of fabric from her early career and this antique French brass button here, surrounded with fabric so that it doesn't move around too much. There's your very thick 2.5 to 3 inch spine, 7 signatures. And then the back is a solid wool boucle with a couple of buttons to secure the fabric to the back cover. It's so hard to get this in full focus. My tripod is not the full C-stand, so I can't really get up there. Whew, that was tough. That's heavy. This is heavy. So I'm almost afraid of how much shipping is going to cost, but it's solid. And I rebuilt the spine to really take the weight. Oh boy. I'm going to pause and see if I can get this in focus. Okay, welcome to the inside of the journal. It's extra wide, so this is definitely a coffee table book. I actually have a vintage frame from a photo album from Donna Morgan, who gifted that to me as a Happy Mail, and this gorgeous blue book cover that she included. And I'm actually going to put some, not just what do you call this, sewing pattern paper, but my new favorite khadi paper. It's actually a cotton fiber, and it's excellent for sketching and watercolors. On the cover, it's actually lined with chinoiserie fabric from Donna as well, just because Gabrielle Chanel did love the coromandel and the Chinese carved arts, as well as an open weave French antique, or actually Lithuanian linen, because of its strength, to give the cover and the whole structure a little added strength. And this is a pretty heavy chipboard here. So this is a 1909 antique magazine, Femina, one of my favorite covers of all time. You know, I don't like to cut magazine pages, so it does fold open completely. But that was just too gorgeous, and it represents the hats that actually launched Gabrielle Chanel's career. So that's why I used it as a cover. 95% of everything in here is antique or vintage magazines and ledger paper. Very little, only the khadi paper and the a couple of pieces of art paper and some Indian linen paper in here are not antique. An antique document from early 1900s, just to give the page and layout a little bit of a patina to it, even though it doesn't really need it because everything's pretty much antique. This represents Gabrielle's early life. So since this is a full life journal for the requester, I did have to go back into her early years, and they led a very tough life. The dad sold clothing and gentlemen's underwear, traveling. They were a vagabond family, and the mother worked in a laundry facility for a local convent. And that's why the very patinaed antique paper from Marie, French manufacturer, I thought made a good compliment. Her mother did die early, and so Gabrielle and her 2 sisters were sent to Aubusine, a convent, Catholic convent, and Montessori, half Montessori for the wealthy girls, and then also a orphanage for young children. The 3 sisters were sent, and then the 2 other brothers that survived actually had to live as farmers and work with the father. But this photo here is meant to represent even though it's faded and hard to tell who that is, a mother and child, so a memory of Gabrielle's of her mother. And of course this is actually vintage or antique French letterhead announcing deaths, and that ribbon actually came from it. So Catherine from French Beaded can pretty much find you anything. It's a shorter page, just because I didn't want to focus too much on the death, but I did want to honor the memory of her mother and her father. So this layout represents her life at the orphanage in Aubusine. She was a little bit older already, 10 or 11, so she's there helping to take care of the younger girls. This is actually an antique French wallpaper from Catherine, one of my last few pieces that I just used on the Bobbsey twins. So there's a little piece of that. And then because it is part Montessori and convent, this represents the chapel of the nuns, and then these are some of the other girls who went to the school and were actually wealthy. So the Montessori side of the school. And it's a French embroidery magazine page. Got in the pocket. And this other side is actually antique Roman Vespers pages. I put a few pages in here because for Sylvie, I think her daughter's getting married soon, so I thought it might make some beautiful ephemera for her journal. And then this is a photograph of a young girl, who's learning how to sew. And she actually did learn how to sew at Aubusine. It's just an old book page, or a book plate, excuse me. So she might have learned from maybe the cooks or the other people working at the convent. I just love the patina of this paper here. This pocket here is actually a vintage French fabric, probably it looked like it was part of an apron, and I got that from Aline. I'll be sure to link her as well below, as well as a vintage French textile, printed to very antique British ledger paper that I love, with the original fountain pen ink on the back there. And this is a piece of embroidery magazine, because again, she was learning how to embroider and sew at the convent. And this is actually a piece of antique magazine from Marie. And then I just put a little bit of the embroidery threads in here for you if you like to embroider. I left a lot of pages blank so that the owner could maybe document some things for her daughter's wedding, or if she has other pieces that she actually wants to include. The book does lay flat. It does have a very thick and strong fabric that Donna gave me for the floating spine. I'm almost laying flat even with all the buttons there. This here is precious. This is an antique French fabric from Provence, and it's backed by an antique paper, French paper from Aline, and it has a little piece of slow stitching on it. And I'll actually be sure to link the lady who's from Australia. She has a slow stitch company that Aline actually introduced me to. But I thought the blue colors and learning how to stitch was very telling of Gabrielle's early life. So you'll notice, even with all the fabrics that I have in here, the book itself closes flat, and I worked really hard to do that. You'll see a lot of this wallpapers you sent me as the first paper swap we did, but by putting that in the middle, who was it? I watch her all the time. Oh my gosh, I forgot her name. My brain is so full. She put them in the middle here, Jibbid Neri, because then it gave space to the outer part of the book. I won't be able to show you that, but I'll link her video. It's the book themed journal that she made, but it gives the pages gaps in the middle so that on the outside, as you're adding ephemera or fabric, it doesn't bulk up too much on the outside. So it's already thick on the inside near the spine, and then you actually have extra room on the outside so you don't get alligator mouth. Anyway, this is a vintage postcard of Moulins, because as Gabrielle aged, she actually aged out of the orphanage and she had to move on as a seamstress. And she also worked in a like a cabaret show as a singer and also like a bartend in Moulins. Not Moulin Rouge, but Moulins. And then this lady here is actually likely to be an Italian actress, but she represents one of the best friends and the lady that Gabrielle wanted to become. She wanted to be a star. She wanted to be a singer. She wanted to be a star of her own cabaret show. So this is actually a antique postcard, and it's backed on a French antique, what do you call those, photo album / scrapbook, cut up, and this is from Nice, France. So this comes from Italy, and this comes from Nice, France. And it's floating on a piece of vintage hand-woven, and probably antique actually, hand-woven linen fabric with the letter C on it, embroidered C, from Miab in the south of France, a brown paper parcel, C for Chanel. This is precious. I wanted to keep this for myself, but this book really deserved this piece of history right here. And of course, there's no other C in my life other than Chanel. So that's on a short piece of art paper, sketch paper. These shorter pieces really were meant to hold some of these fabrics. I didn't want that bulk again. But you'll see all these ledger paper. This is the original 1908 magazine cover of a French stage star, Suzanne Dupré. And some of the ads. Postcard representing Gabrielle living with Etienne Balsan on his estate. So about Edwardian area, Victoria moving into Edwardian era, early 1900s, and the men on his estate. And it's backed by more vintage hand-woven French linen and a antique gros grain from Miab in south of France, a brown paper parcel, and some piano pages from the magazine pages from Femina, because it represents the new life, the wealthy people that she's being introduced to, and the big hats that the ladies are wearing. Big hats, which Gabrielle did not like. Luckily, Etienne's family was a wealthy textile family, and so she had access to different fabrics and trims. Make sure we're still in focus. Okay, this is the back of this magazine. I wanted to include it because of this awesome chocolate ad. Chocolat de Royat. But look at her face. It's so pretty. It's so authentic. Anyway, third signature technically, and you'll see some more of that antique wallpaper. It adds thickness to the center near the spine so that the outside of your pages are thin until you start to fill them with ephemera like this wool. Because again, Etienne's family, they were textile magnates, and so Gabrielle had access to these different fabrics. And some vintage wool. This is actually from the Netherlands though. And then a photo representing Gabrielle, who would steal Etienne's clothing and actually wear them and customize them for her. So this is where she really learned about the male way of dressing and how women didn't have to wear corsets. So her style evolved, and my brother gifted me, so I included some of the original Vogue cover pages that were pertinent to the era. So it's early 1900s. Oh, this actually is a advertisement from one of the feminine magazines, probably the 1909. But I love that women are starting to move away from corsets. The inside of the feminine magazine, women who are going to the opera, ballet, and different evening events, and the new lady friends that she was making. So this is actually a vintage trading card. I think based on the lace, this is probably moving away from the Victorian area to Edwardian area of opulence, and the ladies she's introduced to and the women who are starting to love her hats. And notice the star on this lady, diamond starlet on her headdress. That'll be an important piece in Gabrielle's jewelry in the 1930s. More Femina magazine. There's actually an ad in case you wanted to get your face reshaped before surgery. Vintage French rayon ribbon, where I put one of the numbers on there. I was originally going to put this with each outfit that I made, but these are so heavy, so I just... And this is your very first outfit, which is actually a male riding outfit. Let's see if I can get it. The picture of a lake on Etienne's estate, and then the riding pants and a riding vest that Gabrielle was photographed in with her friend Etienne and also Vogue Covers. But that's just a little piece of fleece. What do you call this? The wool tweed that Gabrielle is introduced to officially through her friends going through to Scotland, but also stealing men's clothing. So I just leave that floating for you. And you'll notice on this magazine page, a woman removes her mustache. So it's cream to remove facial hair. It's kind of funny. And hair from your arms. And a Burberry ad with a woman who's starting to at least dress more appropriate for riding. This is actually a skirt. If you open up the page, oh, I left it as a tuck. But instead of a skirt, of course, Gabrielle would start wearing pants when she rode horses, just like these. These are actually culottes, or meant to have riding boots go up to your knee. That's why I made it more like a culotte. And then on the other side, by evening, she would, of course, be expected to dress like all the other ladies. I don't know if she did. And then there's some pearls to represent the pearls that she would soon be known for. And she was gifted a lot of jewelry by Etienne. But there. More fun ads from these magazines. And that's a set of the third signature. Perfume. And of course, here's a picture of Vogue Covers, the love of her life. I think they started their affair in 1908, 1909. Very few pictures of him. But I love that he's in a reading room, and this is actually a British Museum butterfly and moth book cover. And the stripes, this is a vintage French fabric from Aline also, to represent the beach and their trips to Deauville, actually in the beginning of their affair. So I leave that floating. More magazine pages, vintage ledger, because after her first trip to Deauville and being introduced to the fishermen's striped shirts, she begins thinking about having her own store, even if just to sell hats and sportswear. And it was said that between Etienne and Boy, they actually helped finance her first hat store, and then her first 21 Rue Cambon store in Paris. But I just added a little bit of paper. This actually floats with some vintage wallpaper, because I didn't really like this Vogue cover too much. It's still part of 1912, but I just didn't fancy it too much. And then, of course, the matching wallpaper from Ruby and Pearl XO, and then some ephemera, so that you could take some notes along the way. Vogue cover. This represents her first hat store in Deauville, and that is actually time appropriate. So she was starting to make smaller hats. So I love this Vogue cover. On the other side, in 1912, which was, I think, right about the time she actually did open her beaded store by the southern sea near Spain. So this is a vintage Biarritz postcard that I got from Marie at French manufacturer, and some vintage French fabric from Aline. Both of them will be going into my next journal called Biarritz, but I thought it was very appropriate since that was her first store where she actually started to sell some sportswear, mostly of the jersey knit, cotton knit that she favored, but also a few of her striped shirts. And then here's the C cover from 1912. There. More ledger, vintage ledger, British ledger, and the wallpaper. And this is now the 4th signature, and some of the chinoiserie fabric that you can see in between. So it's a Ephemera magazine page that has a modern car, and as some of you know Gabrielle's history, the love of her life, Boy Capel, died in a car accident, roughly, trying to remember now, 18? I'll have to double check my dates. But this is also a old photograph, vintage photograph of a lady, these smaller hats. And so that's just meant to, probably some of the pain she was going through with his loss. On the inside of that magazine page, I included some Grand Magazine calendar pages from my Louvre book, just because it's thin. It's kind of fun to write on, and I actually do write in this book with my fountain pen, and you'll see some scratch notes from the original owner, but fun pages. Deauville store, actual photograph from the Deauville store and how popular it was, and because of its success, she was actually able to pay back Boy Capel his loan before he died. And this is when she starts to really think about opening and buying properties in Paris and opening stores in Paris, France. So this is just an old French document from 1920 of some lawyers, a lawyer draft, sales draft. And then this jersey piece backed by Sam Poole's swatch cards represents how she made her early fortune. Success of hats, smaller hats, and also the success of more sportswear for the beach. So with their money from Deauville and Biarritz, actually, is this Biarritz? I think this is Biarritz, not Deauville. Sorry. Getting my stores mixed up. She moves and purchases a few of the buildings along Rue Cambon. I think it's 29 through 31 Rue Cambon, and of course her most famous store is 31 Rue Cambon. More magazine pages and an old photograph of the ladies and how they started to dress into the 1920s. This is starting to move into yellows because in 1921, Gabrielle actually came out with her very first perfume, Chanel No. 5, her most famous. So by the 1940s, she was making $26 million in royalties a year in the 1940s. It's amazing. But this represents her evolution, not only in her style, but the women that she was beginning to not only dress, but also scent. So this is just a watercolor on khadi paper, backed by Indian cotton rag paper. And one of the antique photos from 1921, which is the year Chanel No. 5 came out. So this photograph is from Catherine at French Beaded. And this watercolor I did this morning because I have a bunch of these plain khadi papers that I stitched around for notes to give some of the dates. And I thought I forgot to put a perfume in here, so I did that last minute. Very magazine. And in the very center of this 5th signature is an original Chanel No. 5 ad from Catherine, of course, the French magazine. I love to put pretty much French items in my journals. I think it's my thing whenever possible, especially if I'm going to make a journal about Gabrielle's journey as a designer. And then there's the embossed paper of her camellia with the black Indian cotton rag paper. And of course you could use chalk or white gel pen or any white, like a light watercolor or even any type of paint actually. I consider this an art journal more than a junk journal, or maybe a keepsake really, just because of all the old papers. And really when I journal, I do a lot of art in my journals. the other side of that eco dyed paper. So look how awesome that is, from Ellen Martin, and some of the antique wallpaper from Heather at Ruby and Pearl XO. I just thought it really complemented the yellows, and the fact that from 1921 on, Chanel pretty much came out with a new parfum every year. More wallpaper, and then just some French versions of the Edwardian Ladies Journal, just because, again, she was studying different scents for her different parfums that were coming out. I think 1922 was number 22, then 1924 was Gardenia. So botanical scents became a big part of her line. This blue page, these are vintage seed journal pages or ledger pages from the UK. My ledger is about 3 inches thick and it was super heavy, but I'm going to be using a lot of their ledger papers. But I love the blue. This is a vintage blue a flower playing card, vintage French, of course, and then a little bit of dotted Swiss from the French fabrics that I received recently, and then of course some blue wool tweed from Upcycled. I'll be sure to link her store below as well, because I've been getting all my tweeds from her lately. And a little bit of blue wallpaper just to accent the vintage playing card. And then the back of this magazine page, another Vogue cover from 1925. So we are now coming into the 20s, which is now the 6th, not chapter, but signature. Into the 20s, the pants are really taking off in the south of France and all over Europe, thanks to Chanel. And this is actually a vintage postcard that I got from Oh La La Camille. This actually was the postcard that started my buying spree with her. You'll notice all of the future French brooches that I'll be using and pieces of jewelry. If they're not coming from Catherine, they'll be coming from Oh La La Camille. But this is Cannes pajama pants. Of course, a little brighter color. I've been here. This actually looks more like Nice or part of Nice moving into Cannes. But that's okay. So there we go. And a photograph, an authentic photograph from Catherine, French billet doux, with ladies wearing pants by the sea. So moving into the roaring 20s. Allergies comes from some of these old papers, either Heather's or maybe the first Gabrielle book that I made. A picture of a lady wearing pants, and she's so chic. Look at how the bell bottoms look so glamorous. It looks like probably a linen. And then this is a authentic. It's not one of Sam's, but this is an authentic vintage Bon Marché fabric swatches, and they come in these lighter gold metallic fabrics. This is actually my favorite. I kind of wish I kept this one because it has several shades in this French fabric, and of course a picture of the original Bon Marché and the original paper staple that's a little bit rusted, so be careful with that. And then one of my favorite photographs of women wearing pants at the beach. Again, the wide bell bottoms and the short bolero jacket, probably both in linen, but so très chic. In the navy ribbon trim that I get from Miab, and hand-woven white linen from France, also from Miab, brown paper parcel. On this page, I leave quite a few pages blank so that the new owner can add her own photos or memorabilia about the Roaring 20s or Gabrielle Chanel's fashions. But I do have paper clipped here, a 1925 pocket calendar from Catherine. And I just love the navy. 1928 dresses, moving away from the corset, obviously, and it's the Roaring 20s. Short haircuts, just like Gabrielle or Coco, I think she's being called now. And the Coromandel screens, even though this one doesn't have carvings, this screen represents her love for Coromandel and carved Asian art. And actually this lace is French, and it's back on one of Sam Poole's little swatch cards. But this represents a lot of the lace she was wearing herself in her own gowns, and also some of the carvings in her Coromandel screens that she was collecting. She actually had over 30. That's much smaller now, simple postcard, but it represents a lot of the women who are becoming fans of Coco Chanel's style and her clothing. Vintage wallpaper. I just thought it complemented the layout, color. For these pages with the wallpapers, if they're stiff, just give them a little bit of a massage, warm them up a little bit, just like with any new book. But your pages will lay flat. And again, that was to give room for ephemera. Hats from the 1920s. Does that say 1928 or 29? But I love these sleek hats, French style as well. And even though I did not include a picture of the 1926 little black dress that propelled Gabrielle into the Vogue limelight, Vogue magazine, these dresses actually have a similar look and feel. Lower waist, sort of the chevron, or they called it the chevron car dress, the 20s, and then a piece of gray trim from Donna. Just liked how that looked. I originally have some of these pages opened up in the book, so you'll see that some pages might be sticking out, but since it's a coffee table book, I thought maybe she could just fold some of the pages if she wants to keep the book clean, or trim up some of these ribbons, or just fold them up into the pages so that not too much is sticking out. More vintage ledger, art paper, sketch paper. More of Ruby and Pearl's beautiful vintage wallpaper. Heather did gift me in one of the paper swaps a piano duet antique music sheets, and I just loved the patina and how brittle the pages were, so I included the full music sheet called for By the Fireside, Reverie. So you'll see all the pages from this in here, and they are folded, so if you play music or play the piano. She was actually, Gabrielle, not only was a fan of the ballet, but she designed for the ballet, and she also frequented the symphony as well as theater, obviously, because she was designing for theater and actresses. But this is one piece that I have that represented the pearls and the embroidery work that she would work on for some of these actresses or the ballerinas, or even her own gowns as she was going out at night. And I didn't have the courage to cut it up, because once you cut it up, a lot of the beads start to fray. So, ooh, Sylvie, you get my only piece of this one. I thought it complemented that pearl really well. Maybe you can use it in some of your projects or for your daughter's wedding. And there's that other page of By the Fireside, and now we are into this sixth, I think, signature, or seventh, can't tell now. But towards the end, more ledger, another outfit with another Galeries Lafayette vintage fabric swatch from France. Thank you, Catherine. I think Catherine's going to have her another sewing sale, or sewing notions and fabric trims sale on May 30th. If I could wear that here, I would. But I wish I was in Monte Carlo right now. Just clip that there. Actually, let's move it to the top so some of the fabric peeks out. When you have vintage fabric swatches from France, you want them to peek out. 1930s, night and day wear. 1930s is really the epicenter, or the peak of her success before the war, and she starts to actually design jewelry in 1932. In a book, I did one piece of art with the glitter glass that Heather gave me. This piece of jewelry is called, it's like the ribbon necklace from the 1932 line, the Bijoux de Diamonds. It was meant to look like a ribbon. The main necklace had 2 rows of diamonds, and then it was tied together to mimic a bow. I'm going to have to flash a picture because this clearly is not to scale, and it's not very good, but I wanted to at least get a little bit of glitter in here. And then towards the end it had 3 trailing ribbon pieces. Back with some vintage French music. And a Vogue cover from 1939. And one of my favorite all-time Vogue covers from 1939 with the jewelry, because I do love my bracelets. I don't own any diamond bracelets, but I do love bracelets and charms, especially if they have any if there's any charms from France, I'll definitely have to buy them. Clipped on with a bullnose or bulldog clip. Beautiful writing from your vintage ledgers. I'm blocking the sunlight. It's mid-afternoon here, so I'm hoping to catch the rest of the sun. I do a crochet dress instead of a fully embroidered high society lace dress, more of a casual sundress for the summers in the south of France. And of course, an antique French document with the notary. So this likely came from Marie at French Manufacture. She gives me most of my antique French documents. A large piece of sketch paper in case you like to do art in your journals. And a French page from Diary of a Country Lady, Edith Holden, because Gabrielle's birthday is August. I'll double check my dates. And this is the last page, primo, of that music paper that Heather gave me. So that means that's the end of the 6th signature, and we're about to move into the 7th signature, the 1940s and 50s, moving into Coco Chanel's comeback. So I just put some magazine pages from the 1940s to show you some of the designs that were starting to pop up during the middle end of her career, current career before the war. Just left that floating in there so that you can use it in other projects or just as a reference for the types of fashions. And this last signature starts in 1947 in Switzerland, because she did come under fire and was blamed for being a German spy. So she fled, and this was actually the village or the town she went to and she is buried in, Lausanne, in Switzerland. And I'd like to imagine that's a house that she stayed in once upon a time, although she actually stayed in a hotel. And I have that other postcard in that last journal I just made of the hotel she actually stayed in. And then nearby, close by, because she actually did move into watches or loved men's watches, this is a panoramic view of the mountains just outside of Mont Blanc in the Alps. And this comes from Donna Morgan as part of the happy mail she sent me. But I love the browns, the patina, and the representation of the mountains just outside of Switzerland. And some more of this vintage, or now antique, Louvre diary pages from July. And because it was post-World War II, or it was actually the war that drove her into Switzerland, this is actually a vintage photograph because this is meant to be from the desk of Gabrielle, whether it's her design folio, but everything that influences her designs here on out as she plans her comeback to France, to Paris, is in this journal. And then some flower sacks, even though if you translate this Swiss word, that's their word for flower, as in blooms, flower blooms. But these sacks, I thought they were French at first until I translated fully. And this page here, a little bit of the blues and reds transition into the blues. It's a lunch menu, French menu from 1922, so it's a little earlier, or before, pre-war. But Gabrielle loved the blues, and she was now, fully designing or thinking about designing tweed suits. So she just liked that color combination. And as she started to design French or tweed suits, she would think about the ribbon trims and a lot of the wool boucle that she would use in a lot of her suits actually have trim similar. And then another piece of wool boucle trim with the pearls. I just have it stapled to this very thick khadi paper. Again, this khadi paper is spelled Khadi. It's great for watercolor, actually any type of paint, sketching, charcoal. So it's now my new favorite art paper of a 1954 embroidery. This one actually comes from Donna Morgan also. I didn't want to tie it or string it into the actual signature because it is so brittle. But I love the patina, and I think you can still trace these and create your own embroidery, modern embroidery if you embroider. There it is. So that's a beautiful. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So just use a little bit of carbon if you have to trace onto your fabrics, in case you are an artist. This is actually an American swatch card, but I just like how this fabric looks like the wool boucle suits of Chanel and some of the tweeds and more masculine color she was using in her suits. So I like the reference of that. Of course, it's a full size and the patina on the back. This page, this is the last page of the primo page of the music sheet paper. It's just a little bit of houndstooth wool, representing some of the wool suits she was making, backed with one of Sam Poole's cards, swatch cards, and a little bit of vintage lace from Donna, and then a vintage maroon color because of the threads. I just liked how it accented the thread colors there, of a lotion, French lotion. Who knows, she might have used it once upon a time. That's just tucked in there, so it's just a little cluster. A little page of the music, a floating page of an early Chanel suit sketch, in her pink wool boucle, and I do have a little bit of this pink, but I couldn't get to it in my storage unit. So I have a little piece of wool with a little bit of pink, and then some French Chanel ribbon from Catherine. I had Catherine scour her city for any Chanel ephemera that she could find. And then I think we are at the back, and you can see a little peek of the chinoiserie fabric on the back there. And on the back, instead of my traditional papers that I like to use, end papers, I used a antique waltz, pianoforte waltz page, and I even left the end paper for you because it's so dirty and patinaed, with a little quote: "If you're lucky enough to be different, never change." That's not a Chanel quote, but it sounds like something she would say. But this is the end paper for Sylvie, since her daughter is getting married. Was planning to use this as your back pocket. It's actually a Chanel bag from France, one of the ones that Catherine found for me. So, and on the inside, I just did my very last miniature fashion for you. This wool is hard to work with, so you'll see a lot of imperfect stitching just to get the wools to gather together and mold together. And I had to use a little more glue just to keep it from bouncing out. They're super tiny, they fit in the palm of my hand. A little sign, 231 Rue Cambon. That's probably close to my mileage, coming from the West Coast, Seattle. But I just have it in this pocket. You could glue it down if you like, or just leave it floating. And also some of the extra fabrics, if you want to collect them out of the journal to make it even more flat than it is already, or to make room for other Chanel pieces in your collection. But I'll just put that in the back there. And that is the back of your journal. again, it does close pretty flat, just because of the wallpapers in the middle of the signatures. Gave a lot of room so that you wouldn't get any alligator mouth. And then here is your mood board on the front, so that you can add your vintage ribbons, vintage trims, make sure all your pages are tucked in, and then of course your antique beaded tray I have.